Hey, what's up? I'm Sarah Ray with the Atheist community of Polk County. I'm stoked to be the MC for this year's Free Flow, the Free Thought Florida Conference.
Orlando, November 1st, 2nd, and 3rd. The whole weekend is going to be groovy.
I'll be rapping about separation of church and state.
I'll be talking about what might have made America great.
And I will be tripping. No, I will not be doing any tripping.
I'll be talking about the role of science in secular humanism.
Evolution education.
Community organizing and activism.
Transgender equality in America today.
Americans' attitudes toward, wait for it,
agnostics.
I'll be giving the skinny on how summer camp can help build a secular community for kids.
Science education here in the Sunshine State.
Black feminism, free thought, and progressive politics.
You can get your groove on at the Friday night cocktail party.
Friday night cocktails and costumes party, which kicks off the weekend.
We're going to lay down that funky music until we die.
Costumes are optional, but at least some disco will be mandatory.
I personally won't be there unless there's disco.
Join me and hundreds of other science enthusiasts,
Atheists,
Secular humanists,
Heretics,
Feminists,
skeptics,
Non-believers,
Satanists,
And freaky freethinkers.
Tickets are at freeflow.org. That's freeflo.org.
so do me a solid and register today at freeflow.org.
catch you on the flip side.
They should let me write these.
Welcome to our Atheist Community of Polk County meeting in the library. We have some things. We have safety evacuation routes, the door you came in, or the door over there where the restrooms are. We have drinks, snacks. Feel free to help yourselves. We have cookies, Oreos and Chips Ahoy, and water. Restrooms, when you exit the restroom, please remember to prop the door open. It will lock behind you. Also, please turn off and silence your phone. We are recording this.
Speak up.
We are recording this in the back. Free Flow is next weekend.
Yay!
November 1st through November 3rd in Orlando. The dinner is sold out, and the last we saw on Facebook, there were only a few tickets left for the speaker sessions. You can find out all about the event and see if tickets are still available at freeflow.org. That is freeflo.org. The Atheist Community of Polk County will have a table set up if you plan to be there and want to volunteer a little time to work the table. We would love that. Just let us know. And Sarah has some things to say.
Thank you, Austin. Oh, that one's really loud. Austin will be back. I think I know all of you that are here today, but for the folks who you are sitting down. We do record this just so that folks who weren't able to make it can catch back up and get all the information and hear the things that we're learning. With that, the microphone is more for the video than for the room. So we'll, at the end, if Richard wants to do some Q&A, and we'll run microphones around, we just ask you to wait until you have the microphone so that the people who watch at home later will be able to hear your question. That was some feedback that we got from some past videos. So I'm Sarah. I think I know all of you, but maybe not some of you at home. I'm one of the directors of the Atheist Community of Polk County, and this is my son, Austin, and I think we've started a leadership training program here already. He's been so excited to help out and do some of this announcing things. So for the videos, all of the things that we video, for the most part, all of them, end up on YouTube. We do have a YouTube channel, and we do a show separate from the videos that we post here called Free Thought in Florida. That's the show name was chosen by members in the group, the Facebook group, early on. And the idea with that, the hope for the future is that we'll have a rotating cast of hosts that will come in and we'll do a regular show weekly or every couple of weeks, and that people will bring in their news stories and ideas and topics and things that they want to talk about, and that will be a regular thing. But right now it's sort of irregular. We did do 3 since the last meeting. Hello. We did do 3 videos since the last meeting, and these are all interviews with people who are going to be speaking at Free Flow this next weekend. So we talked to Bertha Vasquez. She's fantastic. I absolutely love her to death. She is a classroom science teacher, and she is also a director in her spare time, with the Richard Dawkins Foundation. She works on a program that brings school teachers together around evolution education in our public schools. So she was really interesting to talk to, and I can't wait to hear her talk. Sarah Gillooly is with Americans United for the Separation of Church and State. So they're doing a lot of things about changing the culture to sort of start the chain reaction of events that will ultimately help change public policy. And then, of course, we talked to Seth Andrews, Seth, the host of the Thinking Atheist podcast, and Seth's just great. So anyway, you can get to our YouTube from polkatheists.org or search Atheist Community of Polk County. And please subscribe if you do a YouTube thing. If you're a YouTube person, if you watch a lot of shows there, a lot of videos there, please subscribe. Once we get to a certain number of subscribers, then we can set a URL that's easy to get to. Right now, it's really pretty complicated. Yep. Your turn.
It's muted, are you kidding me? The cleanups of our adopted road continue to be really great. Thank you to everyone who comes out to those. If you want to come out and put in some work in the community, you can find those on Facebook and Meetup. If you have a student that needs to get a volunteer hours, we can sign off on those. We usually spend about 2 to 3 hours cleaning, and then some of us go get breakfast afterwards. That brings us to our speaker today, Richard Sutherland. Richard is a former trial lawyer, graduated from Harvard Law School after earning graduate degrees from USC and Harvard in history and Far Eastern languages. His legal career came together with a lifetime of studying the Bible in his 2009 book, The Hanging Death of Jesus Christ, and Other New Testament Occurrences, which we'll learn more about now. Please join me in welcoming Richard Sutherland.
Thank you, Austin. It's pretty clear you could be a really good trial lawyer. So look out, world. Well, it's great to be here and have a chance to talk about some of the things that are really important in our everyday lives, whether we believe something or we don't believe. What always amazes me is how it is that people will believe something to be the case in spite of the overwhelming evidence to the contrary. And I think Donald Trump was correct. He could shoot somebody on Fifth Avenue, and there would be some of those people who just so it's really, really strange. And I'll give you a little bit more about my own background and how I ultimately became a complete non-believer. I describe myself as an atheist when it comes to any belief in any kind of religion, and I've looked at them all over I'm 79 years old now and spent a lot of years in school and reading this stuff, but a complete atheist with respect to religious beliefs. I'm totally agnostic when it comes to trying to understand how all of this came to be. We don't know, and we will never know. It's far beyond us. And I brought in some books that kind of helped me sort things out. But I actually was in the Army serving on Okinawa in 1962, 1963, early part of 64. I was in the intelligence service. I was an intelligence analyst, Chinese Mandarin interpreter, translator. And being in that service, I was thrown in with all of these Ivy League guys who almost all of them tended to be non-believers. And so I was challenged in that capacity. But I remember when I was about 6 years old, growing up in Texas, way back when the skies at night were big and bright, because there wasn't that much population around. And I had my doubts then. There was just something about it that caused me to wonder. And but I was walking up the hill to our barracks area, and the chapel was kind of over to the right. And I looked at it, I was walking up, and I said, Richard, you just don't believe it anymore. And it was like the weight of the world had been lifted off of my shoulders. But I wanted to get more of a maybe an academic explanation of it all, and I kept reading all sorts of things. And I'm not sure what inspired me to write this book, to put this down, The Hanging Death of Jesus Christ and Other New Testament Occurrences. But this book, The Passover Plot, which perhaps, I'm not sure, started me along that way. Did Jesus really die on the cross? And this goes a little far-fetched, I think, in thinking that it was a conspiracy of some sort. Actually, I think what happened is, and is pretty well explained in this book, and I don't waste a lot of material, a lot of words. As I was reading through it, it gets right to some of the fundamentals right away and asks a lot of questions. And the question is, one, did Jesus even exist? And I don't know the answer to that. Maybe he did, maybe he didn't. But what we do have is all of the material that's written about him by people who never knew him in a language that he never spoke, and written 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, 100 years later. But I mentioned just a few minutes ago that, in fact, I intended to update this book, but Donald Trump got in the way and has consumed a lot of my time. My wife and I have gotten very much involved in Democratic politics here in Polk County. She's now the chair of the Polk Democratic Executive Committee. I started the Democratic Club at Lake Ashton back in February of 2017. There was no Democratic Club there, and it was kind of interesting. So after the election, I sent out a request for anyone interested in forming a Democratic Club to meet at the Health and Fitness Center, and I reserved a room for 20 people. More than 100 people showed up. It just went to show that there were a lot of people in the closet, so to speak, the way a lot of others have been in the closet over the years. So that has consumed our time. But there's something that I really want to get to, and it's because I subscribe to Skeptical Inquirer and have for years. And there was an article that was published probably 5-6 years ago, and when we moved from California, Silicon Valley, to here 4 years ago, it's a stack of stuff, and I don't know what I've done with it for sure. I've started to look for it, but the essence of it is this. This professor had done a study of people who had taken hallucinogenic drugs, and what the report is there was a group of about 50 college-educated people who had taken these hallucinogenic drugs, and what they said was that it was the most profound experience of their lives. Last night, my wife and I attended the New Life Ministries Gala fundraiser in Lakeland. And interestingly, Larry Mitchell, who started that service 30 years ago, and it's really great, rescuing people who have gotten into trouble with drugs. He had a profound experience, and that is what, in a way, caused him to start that ministry, and it's still going today. I am totally convinced, based on the article that I had read in Free Inquiry about the use of hallucinogenic drugs, I'm convinced that Paul was tripping out on Syrian rue on his way to Damascus, because the experience that he describes is very much the ones like LSD and some of the others, and it was a profound experience. There's no question, but that Paul absolutely believed, through and through. It turns out that the period from 300 BC to about 200 AD was a time in that part of the world that had abundant rainfall. And therefore, Syrian rue, or let's call it rue, was very common. And, of course, during that period of time, you had all of this apocalyptic thinking. Jesus definitely was an apocalyptic thinker. As were they all. But, and in fact, Jesus talks about rue being a tithe item, and how the hypocrites would tithe rue. So it was common. And when we're looking for a rational, logical explanation as to Paul's experience, I think it has to be the drug. And that's one of the things that I wanted to update in this book, because in here, I only treat it as a, people have these hallucinations. My mother had an out-of-body experience when she was a girl. She had been very sick, and what she said is that she had left her body and looked back down, and apparently she had a couple of angels with her, and they asked her, are you ready to go? And she says, well, I would like to see my mother or my grandmother one more time. And it was after that she got well. Now, try to persuade her that wasn't a real experience, and it's just not going to happen, So I think that basically people just don't want to die, and so they've come up with these notions of maybe life after death or eternal life. What's interesting, and I don't remember exactly where I have it in the book, but I made the remark, and my wife chastised me for it, about zombies. The first reference to zombies is in the New Testament, and it's after the resurrection and the spirits rose. They came up out of the graves, and they came into town. And I joked about, boy, that must have been quite a sight. All of these these people in various forms of decay, et cetera, coming into town and mingling with the townspeople. Maybe I shouldn't, look at it and laugh at it like that because there are a lot of people who take it seriously. But, how else can you actually think about it? And we think about, some think about life after death. What's it going to be like? Which body is it going to be? Your young one, your old one, whatever. And I've also made some other snide remarks about certain physical forces in the universe. Nothing travels faster than the speed of light, apparently, unless you're a Star Wars, aficionado, and you could go at warp speed. And I said something to my wife once. We'd just got married. It's 1972, and she's a brilliant lady. She got her, she was working on her PhD in chemistry at Harvard, and she'd, applied to 6 med schools and was accepted at all 6, et cetera. So she's a lot smarter than me, and that's why we never argue. But I said to her, I said, I don't get it. Why can't you go faster than the speed of light? Why is it so? I mean, Einstein says that that's the case, but, how can it be? And her response was, well, that's the brilliance of Einstein. There's nothing intuitively obvious about it. So I thought, okay, I won't speculate about these things anymore. But if there is a heaven, and let's say it's even in this galaxy, and not 14 billion light years away, if Jesus actually died in about 30 A.D., and his soul was headed on his way to heaven, heaven's got to be more than 2,000 light years away. So, he hasn't reached heaven yet, much less coming back a second time. But in any event, the religious don't appreciate that that kind of humor. If it's humor, I don't know. We speculate about these things. But, there's some other books, I think, that are really useful to us. And I'll talk more about what's in here. I don't know if you're familiar with this, Achara, the Christ Conspiracy, the greatest story ever sold, etc. She died a couple years ago at a relatively young age. But, when you Google and search for some of these, it's pretty good. Perhaps you've come across the Encyclopedia of Biblical Errancy. Well, it's full. It's just incredible, and it could be much larger than this. But to me, we get into the academics and discussing these kinds of things, but science comes into play. I've started reading Novum Organum by what's his name? All of a sudden, I just started to say Edmund Burke, but it's not. I'll think of it in a minute. It was that book in the 1600s that started the scientific revolution, you could say, the beginning of scientific thought. And then Voltaire came along and added to it, which really propelled scientific thinking. But we've gotten to the point where we now have DNA. And interestingly, there is only one form of DNA on Earth. Every living thing has the same DNA. We share 50% of our DNA with bananas, 98% with chimpanzees, the trees and everything else. The DNA is exactly the same. There's only one. Which leads you to the only rational, logical inference that you can draw from all of that. and that is about 4 billion years ago, we all have a common ancestor. There was one form of life that started with that DNA. And it has kept mutating and mutating and mutating, and it keeps mutating all the time. And one of the books that I think is really useful and fun to read is Richard Dawkins's book, The Blind Watchmaker. Some of you probably have read that, because the mystery is this: how in the world could we have ever come to be, and have eyesight? We have, the bats using sonar and all of it. The fact of the matter is that it's phenomenal, and it's simply beyond our ability to explain, other than you have mutations upon mutations upon mutations, and we have no idea how many blind roads the creatures have gone down throughout the last 4 billion years. They thought at first, the scientists, that maybe life was 3.5 to 3.7 billion years old here on Earth, but they pushed that back another 300 million years. A million years is a long time. It's only been a couple of thousand years since Jesus walked the earth, and it's just a speck of time to go back 1 billion years, 2 billion years, and everything that has happened. So I think for the atheists, it's easy to be a non-believer when we realize that there was no Garden of Eden. There was no Adam and Eve. The earth is more than 6,000 years old, et cetera, et cetera. So do we even engage in talking with people about their religious beliefs? For the most part, it's pretty much a waste of time. On the political side, there is an article by these two University of Kansas professors who researched and published an article in Critical Sociology in February of 2018, and it's called "The Anger Games: Who Voted for Donald Trump in the 2016 Election and Why?" And you could Google that. It's an interesting article. They use something called multivariate logistic regression to filter it all down. I have friends who are PhDs in mathematics, medical doctor, others, lawyers and so forth, who are ardent Trump supporters. And there are people who are high school dropouts and others who are also ardent Trump supporters. So when it comes to the question is, what is it that draws them all together? And this is what this process does, this multivariate logistic regression. It takes all of the demographics and it sifts them down into the bare essentials of what does it. And I recommend the article to you, but they recommend not trying to persuade those people to your own point of view. And it's kind of like a religious thing. There are certain core elements in a person that will not be persuaded by rational thought or anything else. It's just not going to happen. And it's true, I think, with those people as well, because we could talk all day long and it's not going to make any difference. So the question then becomes, what's the value of this? Well, the value is that there are people who do have questions, and it's a fact. And thank you very much, Sarah, for getting this organization going. I don't know how many are in it now, but it just exploded. It was kind of like the Democrats at Lake Ashton. There were a lot more out there than you would have thought, which is great. But in any event, there's an academic side of it that's kind of fun. And I think that's where I had the fun in doing this. And that was going into the text of the New Testament and knowing what I know and reading the way I read. And, when you're an attorney or even an academic, you're going to question everything. And you're looking for consistency or inconsistency, things of that sort. So if you want to not believe that Jesus was the Son of God or that he rose from the dead, etc., the stuff in here, I think, is pretty convincing. Carl Sagan said that everything in the known universe is subject to the same set of physical laws. Everything, you're not going to be any different. Rigor mortis doesn't affect one person one way and somebody else another way. Well, if Jesus had died on the cross, rigor mortis sets in within the hour. And the brain, of course, is dead after 5 minutes without oxygen. It's not going to function anymore. It makes a lot more sense, as I write about here, is that he simply passed out. He was unconscious, if in fact the story is true. And he was taken down by one person, Joseph, and he was placed in the tomb. It wasn't 3 days later that he rose. I mean, the New Testament makes it very clear in a number of different places, and I point those out here, that he was gone by Sunday morning, which is 1 day and 2 nights, So what did he do? According to the story, he went to Galilee. And he was in Galilee for a period of time. And the real enemy that he had was the Sanhedrin. Jesus really objected to their money changing and the way they were ripping off the ordinary people. And that's, he turned over the tables and so forth, and he was really upsetting their gig, so to speak. And they clearly had the Sanhedrin, when you have a situation like what existed in what came to be called Palestine, Judea at the time, because, as I point out in the book, Israel ceased to exist in 722 BC. So speaking of that, there's a couple of really interesting books by an Israeli historian by the name of Shlomo Sand, S-A-N-D. One is the invention of the Jewish people, and the other is the invention of the land of Israel. They're controversial, I think, in a way, but in fact, when you stop to think about it, are there really any Jewish people? According to, they're from everywhere. There's no, the Ashkenazi are the only ones who may really have, but everyone else is from all over. And it's like, the Christian people, I think you could say, and I think that's his point. But nevertheless, he's got some interesting points to make about the way we think about these things. So, when Jesus came back to Jerusalem, I think it's very possible that he really thought that he was invincible. I think that it's very possible that he thought that he had died on the cross and that he came back to life, because he comes back into town and he starts rabble-rousing again. And so what did they do? They grabbed him and they hanged him. Now, here's the interesting thing about that aspect of it. and I point that out in the book, is that only the Romans used the cross. They crucified people by putting the Pope on the cross. The Jews did not do that. Their normal course of killing someone was to stone them to death. You remember the story about Stephen, and that's where Paul was involved because he had disclosed Stephen, I guess, and he was the one who got Stephen's. Thank you. Okay, so Stephen's clothes were given to Paul as a reward for turning in the followers of Jesus. So they were tracking down Jesus's followers. I mean, they were clearly at war. Stephen was stoned to death after Jesus had died. So after that Paul then heads to Damascus, and the reason he's on his way to Damascus is to find and report more followers of Jesus. And that's when he has his experience on the road to Damascus. You know, the one thing I've wanted to do, of course you can't these days, was to go and take that route, you know, on the road to Damascus. May even take a little marijuana or something along and see if I could recreate the experience and see what would happen. But nevertheless, Paul then, as it pointed out in the book in a number of different places, comes up with these theories out of thin air. For example, original sin. Who concocted that? Paul did. The idea that you could have everlasting life if you believed that Jesus was the Son of God. That's purely Paul. You know, it's amazing that a man who had been tripping out on Syrian rue could become probably the most influential thinker in the Western world over the last 2,000 years. What I do is I go through the book and query how in the world the religious officials adopt by vote which writings were to be a part of the Holy Book and which were to be excluded. So at what point did they then become the inspired Word of God? Paul just has, you know, as I point out, there's the entire New Testament is written in Greek. Jesus and all of the disciples spoke Aramaic, and there's no indication that the disciples were anything other than illiterate, fairly ignorant fishers, and this is whom he gathered around him to make these, to go from place to place. There are some who think that Jesus' healing was using also a rue, Syrian rue, or some other form of drug, you know, and that all of this stuff was not, in fact, what happened, but reported what happened. And everything that's written comes 40, 50, 60, 70, 80, 90, 100 years after Jesus' death. Those facts fall flat with people who are believers. It's like with Islam, you know, the idea that an angel Gabriel could, over a 24-year period, have dictated the law of God to an illiterate desert dweller, and that he then in turn would dictate that to scribes, and that would become the Quran, is it's hard to believe, that, but they believe it. And so in spite of the fact that I think I've marshaled a lot of facts and legitimate questions regarding the instances, for example, the rising from the dead, and certainly Acts chapter 5, verse 30, where Peter is telling the Sanhedrin, that, the God of our fathers rose Jesus, and then you killed him by hanging him on a tree. Another place it talks about stoning, but this apparently, I've looked at a lot of reports from religious authorities who are religious, and they just ignore that for whatever reason. It's kind of strange to me. But in any event, if you have any specific questions or whatever, I'd be happy to entertain those, just to chat with you. I'd be interested in knowing where you are and how you came to be a free thinker, so to speak. So anyhow.
Yeah, so if you have any questions specific to the content of the book or the talk, we can do that, and I'll run the microphone around again, all for the benefit of the folks who couldn't come, or we can wrap up to you guys. Any questions?
You mentioned that you were derailed in your second edition, where you develop the Rue model more accurately. Is that going to happen? Where do you stand?
In 2020, I am absolutely done with politics. November, what is it, 5 or November 3 of 2020. Yeah, that is the explanation. I'm now totally satisfied that explains it. So that's the plan.
Jesus comes from Paul,
who never knew Jesus, never spoke with him,
who boasted that he had never met him. I think he basically said he was channeling Jesus.
Yeah, I don't know. It's fantastic is what it is. Someone else.
In any of your studies, have you ever researched if people that are just fervently religious are different, their brains in some neurological way are different?
Well,
that they can't, they can't even look at an option.
It is a mystery, and the reason I found that article I mentioned to you, the Anger Games, who voted. I was curious how Hitler could get ordinary people to do what they did with the ovens and the concentration camps, etc. And it became clear that Hitler plugged into something that was already in existence, the anti-Semitism. Trump did the same thing. And I will jump ahead and tell you a little bit about what these professors concluded, that these followers are misogynistic, they are racist, and they're xenophobic. They see women, minorities, immigrants as being the line cutters, those getting ahead and getting something that they're not entitled to. Now, why is someone like that. It could be part of their background, but I guarantee you, these friends of mine in California, they are racist, and but it's not that they just come right out and say it's some. For example, the PhD in mathematics was complaining in the golf tournament about how these two groups had finished these two twosomes. It was in a contest. He complained about their handicaps, and he mentioned that they were Asian. What difference does it make that they're Asian? It's just the way they are. Are we wired a certain way? The whole idea of college is to teach people how to think critically. And I told you, I think when I was 6 years old, I had a doubt. There was something. Well, I remember going to church there in Texas and coming out when I was 6 years old, and we just sung the song, Jesus Loves the Little Children of the World, red and yellow, black and white, they're precious in his sight. I walked out and I said, well, you know what? That's not what's happening. The adults are not doing that. Particularly with the Mexican kids, that they weren't being treated the same fairly. But see, those contradictions are not necessarily what persuades a person to a point of belief or not belief. I mean, it's hard. Someone was saying the other day, it's hard for us to imagine ourselves not being, that we will be absent from the world totally and completely. We're very much in it, while we're here. But there will be a point in time when there will come a point in time when the world won't exist. But people have difficulty with that. And they were discussing this issue about, well, do you prolong life, or is it life after death? In what form and so forth. But it's all about eternal life. You got cryogenics. It is fear of death. And I guess everyone fears death. Whatever. I mean, it's the unknown. But we will be non-existent. That is true. That is absolutely true. So I've given this book to a couple of Christian friends of mine, and to get their feedback on it. But they really can't grapple with it. They don't want to grapple with it.
Do you find a connection between religion and conservative politics?
The thing about Trump is that he's a son of a bitch, but he's their son of a bitch, and that's the way they look at it, and they're willing to concede that as long as he's going to stand up to outlaw abortion, to appoint conservative judges, things of that sort. So, the human brain can basically rationalize anything. The observation that I've made in the past is that the human brain is more rationalizing than it is rational. It's this want to believe somewhere comes in, but some of us just the facts get in the way, and they do. It's well, growing up in Texas, I was kind of a conservative or whatever in a way. Now I'm probably as liberal as anyone is ever going to get politically, whatever. We have 2 daughters. I put my wife through med school and so forth. To me, it was, I've been around strong women all my life. My mom, my sisters, my teachers. So I didn't have a problem in having really strong, intelligent women, in my life. In fact, I wouldn't want it to be any other way, I think. So it's okay. So I tell people we've been married 48 years. We never argue. And that's the reason why I don't have a lot of gray hair. I said, well, you never argue? I said, well, no. And I told the guy, I said, we never argue. And because he was surprised that I was as old as I am. And he said, well, what do you do when she's wrong? I said, she's never wrong. I could tell right then that he was going to have trouble, you know. I mean, it wasn't going to work for him. But anyhow, I think that we need to keep pushing letting people know that there is a community that of non-believers, and we are. And my understanding is that those who do not profess belief in a superior being in the United States is a greater number than the evangelicals in this country. So that's a good sign, I think. And hopefully, I translate it into political things because politics is so much involved in how we treat. I really believe this. I'm with Matthew chapter 25, that even as you do it unto the least of these, you feed the hungry and you clothe the naked and you house the homeless. To me, that's just a universal right way to do things. So even though maybe Jesus gets credit for it, but still, it's just a good way to do things. I just wish that there were some of those of a different political persuasion that would take a kinder look at that. But anyhow, the politics is infused with religion. There's no question about it, religious belief.
Have you watched The Family? Did you see that series?
No. No. I mean, there's so much television I haven't watched.
It's a documentary about a secret society, and it's real. It's real. It's true. Look it up. Yeah.
I will look it up. Yeah.
Very good. It's 5 nights or five. It's a series of 5. Have any of you seen that? No. I have. Oh yeah. It's good, isn't it? It's real interesting. It's eye-opening.
So.
For me, I think the style of the presentation was a little conspiratorial, sort of. Like I think they were putting a little more maybe into it than there is. But there is legitimately, or was for a long time, a shadow organization. They're kind of out in the light now, obviously, that conspired to get government officials in their pocket to do the bidding of the religious mindset, the religious worldview, behind closed doors that nobody knew that this was going on. And the sort of organization that was at the center of it all was called The Family. And so that's what the Netflix series is about.
I also wrote a book called at about the same time, and how the average American has hanged himself. Because I kind of like that idea of that noose, and it goes into more about the oligarchy and how the average American has voted against his own best interest, and that's where we are right now. And on the news, you saw the rioting in Chile. I could see that happening here because we have people who are now working full-time jobs that they can't make ends meet. That's not the way it was when we were in the workaday world. We didn't have $22 trillion of debt, and we had living wages and so forth. There's been no real increase in the living wage in 40 years. So that's part of the liberal side of my. I was lucky. I went through 4 years of college, 5 years of graduate school, 3 years law school. We're top schools, and my total tuition was $15,500. Yeah, see, there you go. My last year at Harvard Law was $2,300. The second year was $2,100. The first year was at $1,900. You know what it is now a year? $64,000. Our daughter graduated from Santa Clara Law School, 6 years ago, I wrote a check for $127,800 to pay for her tuition for law school. So are the young people today really getting... Yes, totally. And that's the reason why I'm doing what I'm doing. When I could be... in good conscience, I just can't sit by and do nothing. It's just unfair. So, anyhow, that's not exactly on the topic here. It's... Ma'am.
The article is called the Anger Games?
The Anger Games.
Okay.
Who voted for Donald Trump in the 2016 election and why? You can Google that. There are two things that comes up. One is the Critical Sociology Journal, and the other is Sagebrush. It's something, but it has a synopsis there that in an abstract that will reduce it down too, because it gets a little technical. But in a sense, that's what it did. It took all the demographics and it just got them down to the bare essentials. Does anybody else want to say something?
Between maybe a liberal Episcopalian believer and somebody that believed God has sent Trump to be president. I mean, that's kind of worlds apart too, to me. Or a Unitarian and somebody who believes Trump sent God. I mean, God sent Trump.
The thing of... Try to figure it out, try to figure it out. It's, Carl Sagan also made this observation. The most complicated thing in the known universe is the human brain. It is. And when you stop to think about it, I think one of the reasons why I'm a liberal is because I understand that basic fact. I mean, who's to say what should be or shouldn't be or whatever in terms of whether you're gay or trans or straight or anything else. The human brain. Okay, thank you.
All right, so is that the last question? Are those the last of the questions? Okay. Oh, wait, hold on. You can find all of our upcoming events on Facebook and Meetup, but here's some of what we have coming up. November is booked up in a way that makes it difficult to schedule our cleanups every other week, so we'll add those in where we can make it work. Saturday, November 16th, we have some folks going to the medieval fair in Sarasota. Sarasota. Our next monthly meeting is November 23rd, and me. That's you.
Okay, so next month we're going to do something a little different. We have been very fortunate in having a number of speakers readily available and happy to be here. And for November and December, both of those hit real close to holidays. So what we're going to do is we're just going to have sorry for those of you who watch at home, but no cameras. We're just going to circle the chairs and just chat. Sort of like what we do after when our speakers are done, but we'll have a lot more time to spend on that. So bring your questions, bring your ideas, bring the things that have been rattling around in your brain to this next one. And it can be anything from, things that you've been thinking about non-belief, about belief, things that you'd like to see this organization do, and how we can make that happen. Sort of run the whole range there of things that we can talk about, but it'll only work if you all bring things to talk about. because I can surely come up with some stuff to talk about, but you all don't want to hear me talk about it. So, so that would be I think that'll be a really good opportunity to sit around and really get to know each other and challenge each other and ask some of the hard questions. So we hope you'll come out and join us. That's Saturday, November 23rd, back here at the library.
2 p.m.
Your turn.
Thank you for coming. Enjoy some snacks and conversation. And Keith over there.
Thank you, Richard. Thank you, Richard.